My father died in 2020 of stage 4 colon cancer. He died a month and a half after his diagnosis because he let it go. I was really out of shape. I was an alcoholic. Earlier that year, I had quit, and I started to get into shape. I have a really upset stomach in the morning. So in July of 2023, I started vomiting just constantly. For 12 hours, I vomited. So I went to the ER finally. I'm still so emotional about it. I can't believe after all this time I am, but he's saying, I think it's cancer. When that hit me, I was convinced I was going to die, so I started giving away my stuff.
Ice cream or donuts.
And telling my wife to be prepared. Approaching age 50, I was ready for things like maybe an enlarged prostate, trouble urinating, back pain. All of these things kind of lined up into what you hear about approaching age 50. You know, my father had it and so do I. And I just, you got to get to work and put one foot in front of the other. So one of the biggest ones actually was ED, erectile dysfunction. I did not know until after really exactly where that was coming from. But with a diagnosis such as bladder cancer, eventually, after maybe more than a year, you realize that it affects everything in that area down there, digestive, just sexual problems. I had no idea that bladder pain could affect the back so much and the hips. Really, when it first started, I started vomiting, and I was really out of shape. I was an alcoholic. Earlier that year, I had quit, and I started to get into shape. And when I got into shape and started losing weight, things started to kind of uncover. And then I would like vomit occasionally. I'd have a really upset stomach in the morning. So in July of 2023, I started vomiting just constantly. For 12 hours, I vomited. So I went to the ER finally, and it took me a while to kind of drag myself in there, unfortunately. The attending physician said, I'd like to give you a CT scan to make sure you hadn't ruptured anything, you don't have any internal bleeding. So when the report came back from that CT scan later, after I'd already got out of the hospital, so they're like, okay, you have to go to a urologist. And that actually uncovered more hurdles as I got into that. Then it was, this fever pitch. And then, well, do I have a smudge or do I have carcinoma? Why the fever pitch? So I go to my urologist, and my urologist ends up being a very pragmatic fellow, but I like that because I'm a very logical type guy. And he just, he's like, I'm almost 100% sure you got it. We got to do a scope, a cystoscopy to make 100% sure. And then we're going to take it out, the tumor out, and everything's just going to go. So I remember leaving that office very distinctly. I went to make my appointment, and I'm very lucky. I have very good insurance. And I was in like a cubicle waiting area, and there was a gentleman that had come in with probably a similar problem, and he had missed his appointment and it was late. And they were explaining to him about how he was going to have to wait a month. And I was sitting in there, and this still just chokes me up just a little bit, because when I was sitting in there, I didn't know whether I had cancer or not. And I remember thinking, I'm going to give this guy my appointment. And if it wouldn't have been for my wife, and I decided against it, but that was that pivotal, like I keep saying, information gap, lack of information, the information that you have to seek out on your own, revealing itself. And that was almost like, okay, I'm scared to death, but here we go. So I was just on a hunt from then on out, just information gathering. Every time somebody brings those topics up, it hits me, it punches me, just kind of right in the stomach still. I'm still so emotional about it. I can't believe after all this time I am. But as far as, leading up to procedures, I go in there and the doctor's like, cystoscopy, and, a scope to see. He's not really explaining anything. He's saying, I think it's cancer. We have to look. And I had no idea what a cystoscopy was, but I've gone through at least more than 10 cystoscopies, on up the easiest possible way you can look for that. Then, catheters. It started into the CT scans. In the cystoscopy, when the doctor went in, he looked, he said, okay, I'm 99% sure. We can't be 100% sure until we get that biopsy back. But we're going to go in for surgery now, which led into the turbate, which is transurethral resection of a bladder tumor. I had a grape-sized tumor, over my ureter from my left kidney. Luckily, later I found out that it was confined to the bladder and not the ureter. And I was in one of those waiting periods that we get with cancer. And I very thoroughly read my notes. When I go to my doctor, he's like, you've been reading my notes again. And I'm like, yeah, I'm going to read your notes every time, But it said pleural nodule found during the CT scan in my left lung. So, I was like, okay. And my doctor put potentially highly concerning. So I'm balanced on this. Am I going to live and am I going to die? And my father died in 2020 of stage 4 colon cancer. I've been the caregiver and now I'm the patient. When I watched my father die, and I buried him, he died a month and a half after his diagnosis because he let it go. When that hit me, I was convinced I was going to die. So I started giving away my stuff, and telling my wife to be prepared. They finally said I have non-muscle invasive bladder cancer. My initial diagnosis, I felt completely sucked of all energy, and you're lost and you're confused. And I immediately sunk into depression and anxiety. And I didn't even realize it. And she came in one day and she said, I signed you up for the walk to end bladder cancer in Columbus. I stepped on that precipice, on the edge of this pit that I dug myself out health-wise. I used to weigh over 300 pounds, and it's just, and I was just so sick the whole time during my surgery. And I stood up there and I was like, I can start. I feel like I can put a foot out on that path that I was talking about. And I ended up in Columbus at that walk. And that's when I started to bring that community in and then appreciate my wife's caregiver status. And to this day, she's just my inspiration. Hi, everybody.
We're almost to Xenia, about 10 more minutes. We currently are 9.75 miles in.
She runs marathons now. She when I look at her, it gives me the strength to move on. When the pathology came back, I had my transurethral resection of a bladder tumor. I had to have a stent put in from my kidney to my bladder because the hole, like I said, it was over the ureter. So the hole will close up. So I had that stent in for a solid 8 weeks before it was taken out. And that was my second procedure where they put me under and they pulled the stent out. I woke up for the second time with a bladder full of chemotherapy. And that's what's interesting about, questions about treatment journeys. And it's like, I've heard of people going through chemotherapy before, but here I am, woke up and I'm not off the medication yet. And I've got a bladder full of chemotherapy. What's going on? I had 6 induction doses. And when they give it to me, I'm going to see my nurse, amazing person. They put the BCG into my bladder via catheter and I have to hold it for about an hour. So I drive myself to my appointment. And I hop in the car. It takes me 15 minutes to get home. And then I have to lay down and I have to turn for 1 hour, 15 minutes on each side to coat the bladder. I get very much anxious and depressed a week before. I'm going through my life like I don't have cancer. And then I'm like, oh my God, I got a catheter next week. And then I'm back in and I get depressed and I get anxious. And then it's become this process. Then I get sick and it's daunting. My bladder is the most important thing in this equation. I found that out really early. It didn't really occur to me right away, but then there's been no talk of removing my bladder. He, like I said, maybe that pragmatism with him is really a good thing because he won't say anything unless it's absolutely necessary. And I can see how alarming that might be because for me, he's known me for a while. He gets Christmas cards for me now. So it's like, hey, if you're I'm going to ask questions, because I just don't want to lose my bladder. But luckily now he said no. But each time I go in for a cystoscopy, like in a week, I'm just waiting. I know it's not going to have progressed enough to become muscle invasive that quickly because I'm checked so often. But, cutting it out has its own problems.
Oh man, I kind of still got cancer here, even though it hasn't been found. We haven't seen anything yet. We like to call it no evidence detected.
Human beings are naturally modest when it comes to those areas, to urination, bladder, anything. Let's just say glancing downwards. So what I do is just like in this particular case here, mentioning erectile dysfunction and being open with that. It's a natural human male thing that we may have to deal with in different ways, but I do not experience sexual dysfunction anymore. I'm very thrilled about that. It's very worrisome for, probably especially a male. I think my father was going through it like late in his age, and he expressed to me how hard it was. My health was very important when it came to that ED question too. I know that it was due to the bladder cancer itself, but it was also due to comorbidity. I completely threw scientific medicine, self-advocation, proactive learning, education, all these things. I can specifically tell you where I do not have any problems anymore. Self-advocacy is absolutely essential. If I could give anybody just one piece of advice, if I was only allowed that one piece of advice, I'd say, don't give up, step out on that first step and make yourself vulnerable to everything that's going to happen to you. You need those partners. You need people to advocate for you, friends and family, but the buck stops right here. You're going to be scared to death, but you're on your own here for a minute. You're going to have to dig. It became a very stark reminder to me that life has no guarantees and that I was going to be on my own. And through going on 2 years of bladder cancer, it remains true. It's such a funny paradox. I'm on my own, though I have so many people in my network to help me, but sometimes I feel apart from that group. You know what I mean? So then I kick in, that self-advocacy comes in, and it gives me strength. My message of hope to people that were experiencing this is just keep your feet on the ground. Find a direction to head. My biggest problem was I didn't really orient myself. I become very isolated and I got depressed, and it's probably unavoidable, but grab onto that care partner.
Hi there, it's Easter Sunday 2025. We just biked about 8 miles.
You're going to have to go forward. You're going to have to be strong. You're going to have to pick up things along the way. I tell you what, by the time you reach 2 years, if you do the right stuff, your life is going to change. I am a living testament to that. My entire life has changed. And if you spoke to anybody before I got bladder cancer and to now, I am a completely different person in physical and mental. I have a different personality. I love people. I cannot wait to get up in the morning. I can't wait to help those people. I try to help at least one person per day if I can. That's like my rule.